Today we are talking with Barbara Gontrum, who is Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the University of Maryland Law School in Baltimore. Barbara served as the Law Library Director and later the Assistant Dean for Library and Technology beginning in 1979 until she left those positions about a year ago. Barbara, let's begin with a little of your personal history. Could you tell us a little bit about your life, both when you were young and perhaps today?
So I grew up in Indianapolis. My father was the chief of medical labs at the VA hospital in Indianapolis. My mother was a bacteriologist before she got married, but as certainly was as the norm in those days, she was a stay-at-home mom, so I had a pretty uneventful childhood. My husband is in private practice, so we have 2 children, so our married life has been a little more hectic since I worked full-time at the time. But our children are now grown, of course, and both are lawyers. Both, in fact, graduated from the University of Maryland Law School and are doing well, so I think things worked out fine.
Well, that's what you always want in one's kids, have them be successful at whatever they choose, and hopefully find something they enjoy doing as well. You know, I certainly know that many of us in our field were that way, and I certainly was, and I suspect you were as well over the years.
That's right.
Could you tell us a little bit about your formal education, what degrees you hold and where you got them?
So I went to Purdue and then library school at University of Illinois and have a law degree from Duke University.
Duke. Well, you became a law librarian sort of early on, as most of us did, but did anyone play a role in that decision, or how was it you were attracted to law librarianship?
So I think when I graduated from college, I really wasn't the science and math expert that my parents were, so I looked around and was interested in law as a career, but at that point had no ambition to be a lawyer. So I looked into law librarianship, and I applied to library schools that only had legal bib courses, only library schools with those, and U of I was one, and they gave me a full scholarship, so that's how I ended up there.
It's an interesting story. Many of our colleagues have similar stories, but perhaps at different places where they've gone to school. But we're all there's a certain similarity to our backgrounds, all of us, and yet we're not all identical in any matter means. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about your career? You've had positions. You were, of course, here at the University of Maryland for quite a few years. Could you talk about jobs you've had in the past as a librarian and perhaps what you've accomplished in them, or some of them?
So I was extremely fortunate that at University of Illinois, my faculty member who taught the legal bib course was Kathy Price. And she was instrumental in getting me my first job, which was as a law firm librarian in Cincinnati at the Taft Law Firm. Sometime during that year, I decided to go to law school, so I started law school in Indiana. And about halfway through my first year, Kathy called me because she had just gotten the position of director at Duke, and she called and said, "Do you want to come be my reference librarian and finish law school here?" And that took about 5 minutes to make a decision. I said, yes, fine. So she waited until the end of my first year. We packed up a U-Haul and headed out there. In the fall semester of that year, the very first week when the students came back, I met my husband because he was the student member of the library committee at Duke. And so he was a third-year student at that time. And I ended up staying there. He came back to Maryland to practice. And I stayed on to get my degree and was reference librarian for a couple of years, and then Kathy promoted me to associate, so I had 2 years as associate director. And so those were great learning experiences. I mean, Kathy was a terrific mentor.
She seemed to be a very accomplished librarian herself, and must have been a wonderful teacher mentor.
It was. I learned so much during those.
She's now a neighbor of yours, sort of. You know, she's retired and is living back in the D.C. area, so not very far from here in Baltimore.
Right. No, she was great, and So then we decided to get married, and I resigned the position at Duke and came up here. And amazingly enough, and this is just being in the right place at the right time, the Maryland was looking for a library director. And so I actually came back from my honeymoon and had a job offer to start immediately as the library director.
What a wonderful
here.
wedding gift of sorts.
It was, and so she said, I've now been here for 34 years, so I have it between having Kathy as a mentor and just being in the right place at the right time. I think that's what happened to me. So really my career, as you said, has been at Maryland, and I think, as one of our former deans who was here a long time for deans used to say that it wasn't the same job all the time, and I think that has certainly been true. That I've been through 2 buildings, construction. One when I first came, which was very stressful, and because I had no idea what I was doing, and then 20 years later, which was much simpler, complex of course, but I knew what I was doing at that point. We were one of the first libraries that automated all of the systems, and one of the first law libraries that did that. And that again was because when I first came, they had money as part of the building project, and there was allocation for computerization, so we went ahead and did it. We've always, I think, done a lot of teaching, so we've always taught the first year course separately, research course separately. And at some point, just by sort of being, again, the luck of being on the curriculum committee, a year that they did a massive curriculum restructuring, managed to get an advanced legal research requirement, and that was in the 90s. And
I imagine the students find that very beneficial.
they do. They do. So, prior to that time, we had taught it as an elective, and you know what happens. You have 20 or 30 journal students in your class. But we have a requirement where every student must take the advanced research course, and most of them take it in a specialized area like health law or environmental law or something like that. But that, I think, has been one of the things that has been the best for the students. And really, it's just I've had the opportunity to have librarians and library staff throughout the years who've just been excellent. Some have been here a very long time. Others have come in, for a few years and made significant contributions. And that's the key. I mean, that really is the key. Is just having people who are fantastic and willing to work and have ideas and are creative. And we've always looked at things. I've always looked at things as if not so much the way traditional libraries do things, but just what do the faculty and students need, and how can the library position itself to do that? And I think that's been the key to the success.
Well, I've heard similar tales in a number of these conversations with our colleagues, and I too shared that philosophy. And when I was a director, taking advantage of the talent you have within your subordinates, and they're wonderful. And sometimes the results are probably only enhanced by having creative minds working together.
Oh, absolutely.
I think they say. Well, you have not spent all your time here in the library. You've gotten out. Let me tell a tale out of school a little bit. Some years ago, those of us in the Mid-Atlantic area, and I'm talking about you and Emily Greenberg here in town. She was the director at University of Baltimore for many years. Would get together with several of us from the DC law libraries. There were, I think, 7 or 8 of them down there in those days, the academic libraries. And even with our colleagues in most parts of Virginia. And we'd get together, and I remember one time we all piled on a train at Union Station in D.C. and rode up here and got off and walked across the street and had lunch with you and Emily, and had a grand time. It was a nice way to get to know people. And, but you've done, you've taken that knowledge or whatever you've gotten, and you've done a lot of things in the profession. Just talk a little bit about some of that activity that you've done.
Yes, certainly. Again, Kathy, very early in my career, appointed me as chair of the placement committee, and that was great because I got to know a lot of people early on. I was involved in the section, the academic SIS section, also the ALS section, but those were really very early years, so certainly the academic SIS wasn't the complex organization that it is now. I think mostly in terms of my professional organizations, I'm most proud probably of the work with the Council of Library Directors, which is the Maryland system. There are 11 libraries, 11 campuses, 13 libraries in that system, with College Park being the largest. And over the years, that's probably the place I've been the most active as chair of that group many times, and doing a lot of work. I think we decided here early on that it was extremely important to be part of that group and to share their library system, not to have a separate library system, as most law libraries did, at least at the initial stages. And I think that proved to be perfect for our users. I mean, our faculty and students have always had ready access to all the materials. That group was a great group, so that was good. And then, of course, I have done a lot of site visits. I'm just about to chair my first site team, which is going to be an interesting
That'll be a fair amount of
experience.
responsibility, yes.
We'll see how that goes, but I certainly recommend that to everyone. I think just the experience of seeing the other schools and getting to know, bonding with the team members, I think is a fabulous experience.
I turned one of those experiences into a paid gig one time, right before I retired. I had years ago been on a site inspection team for a law school that I won't name at this point. And the dean at that school at the time must have been favorably impressed with whatever I did, fortunately, because years later, literally probably 20 years after that, he called me up and asked if I remembered who he was, and I did. Well, he was now at a new school that was actually up for provisional approval by the ABA, and he wanted to put the faculty and everyone in the place through what he called a mock inspection. And so I went down. I was on a team with several others. I mean, he put together what would be a real team. And the beauty was, unlike what you'll be doing at the end of this, and you won't get paid, but we were for that one as consultants, and we didn't have to write a report. So it was a wonderful experience.
That's nice.
Yes. Maybe one of these days, one of them will do that. That is, I think, unusual, though. But in fairness, the school got approved when they had the real inspection about 6 months later.
Great idea.
Yeah. Well, he had been creative in getting a couple of schools approved before that, so this dean apparently really knew basically what was needed and was able to do it. So you worked actually for the ABA doing site inspections and over the years. And you've done some things for the Association of American Law Schools, I believe, too.
I'm as part of the section, the ALS section. Again,
Okay.
I think I was a part of the original creation of that section. And
The one where the
law
academic
libraries.
directors get together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very helpful. A lot of people have spoken, they find that in some ways more useful than the annual ALL meeting for them. Mostly, I think, because the programming and the focus at the annual meeting is more on our newer colleagues. We are the teachers, supposedly.
Right.
Whereas there, you can talk about your own problems as an academic director, even a fairly seasoned one. That's right. Well, you have now been here at the University of Maryland Law Library for about 35 years or thereabouts. During that period, you have had to supply access to legal information to not only students and faculty, but judges and attorneys here in the Baltimore area. It's also been a period when there's been, shall we say, significant changes in the way we go about providing access to legal information. I mean, when I started, it was mostly books, and we got a few microfilm forms along the way. But now a lot of it's digital. And from your experience, could you talk about some of the changes that you think you've seen take place, especially in more recent years, and maybe put your predicting hat on if you want to be try it, Tell me where you think it may be headed in the next few years, our profession.
You know, I mean, obviously there have been dramatic changes, and I mean, who would have expected that 30 years ago that we would now be canceling our last copy of the Federal Reporter?
Mhm.
It's just really mind-boggling. And you know, certainly there are lots of thoughtful people in our profession who have been predicting the future and talking about the changes and working on important things like preservation. So I guess the only thing I would say is that I really do not think that librarians are an endangered species. I still think that the human touch, and it may be different things, and of course it already is different things, but it may be different things in the future. But I think that there's always going to be a need for the skill set that librarians have, and the overall, just the basically sitting down and helping people. I think when you come down to it, that's really what librarians do, and that's what the faculty talk about when they talk about how wonderful the library is. It's the service aspect of it. It's not, at least here, and I think in many places, it's not the collection, it's not the resources so much. It's the fact that someone took the time to figure out what they needed and get it to them, and quickly and efficiently, and despite the fact that they may have asked for the wrong thing. I think that's the fundamental core of what librarians do, and I don't think that's going to go away.
I've heard others comment, essentially, pretty much universally, that the role we have as librarians is actually not going to vanish. It's likely to become even more important, in that you can get so much stuff with this digital media that you can just be overwhelmed with hits, shall we say, when you try and do something. And how do you focus your research? How do you focus your questions so you get what you really need, and not all sorts of other stuff that you have to spend all your time weeding out after you get it?
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let me go off a little bit from what we talked about in advance that we talk about, and if you know this doesn't go well, I can always clip it out of the and no one will be the wiser. But you're in a building that was opened about a year ago.
No, 12 years ago.
12 years ago. Well, it's a beautiful building. I knew it was fairly modern. Coming up here today, I saw all the carols and had data and plugs, so you could plug in your computers. And I remember, and I commented on the way by, you might remember, it smelled like a library. You still do have some real books on the shelf.
We absolutely have books.
Yeah. And this room is, tell me a little bit about this. It looks like it's faculty writings. It's a special room.
It's faculty writings, but our main sort of claim to fame, if you will, is the Thurgood Marshall. It's the Thurgood Marshall Law Library.
Yes.
And so we have a special Thurgood Marshall exhibit, and before you leave, you should go down and see our photo collection.
No, I want to do that.
We have baby pictures of Thurgood Marshall. We have a whole entire wall that we have one of our faculty who knew Thurgood Marshall and has written a book. Actually, Young Thurgood is his book that just recently came out. And so he is a favorite of ours, and he has done almost all of his research in the library. We've given him a room over the years. And so he has given us his collection of pictures and photos, and that's really...
Now, I noticed in this room there are a number of document boxes. Are those some of the Marshall collection?
A little bit of the Marshall collection. Most of this are Maryland history. Of course, there's a Maryland State Law Library, but we do have a lot of the Maryland records as well. So that's primarily what it is.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting transition, this building. It looked newer than 12 years, but that's pretty new, actually.
It's worn well, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it has. It's well kept up, and it's very tasteful. I like the way you put it together. I don't see any obvious monuments to the architect of strange things that don't work.
This building was very, actually, as I said, it was the second building process I was in. And the architects were very good about listening to the librarians and what we needed. So it practically worked out as well as aesthetically.
Yeah. Well, it combines the traditional, the books that I enjoyed, the aroma. Literally, there's a a smell we used to get walking through the old stack floors in libraries and
Right.
from the bindings and the paper and whatever else. And
Well, I can't say that they're used all that much.
well, and today people are telling me that many of the students come in and they have their screens on their whatever device they're using, and they really want to call stuff up there. They don't want to be bothered with a stack of books and trying to jockey around with all of those, and then go find, heaven forbid, a real photocopier when they basically can download it or something and keep it that way. And it's a new world.
It is a new world.
Yeah, and the predictions from the so-called experts are memory doubling still roughly about every 18 months in computers. That we haven't seen anything yet. I mean, there's going to be more changes in the future that'll just be mind-boggling to
I know.
many of us.
You think about the pace of change so far, you think about what will happen, it will just be exciting to see.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, that continues. I've been retired 10 years, and the move away from worrying about physical volume counts and physical ownership to accessibility has really kind of come to fruition during the 10 years I've been retired. We had been pushing for it as librarians for a long time, but there was resistance in other circles. It was too easy to evaluate a library on the size of its volume count in physical books. Even if they were worthless books, they got counted.
Right.
A lot of places had a bunch of obsolete case books from teaching classes on the shelf, and they counted them in the old days. We our generation got away from some of that, but now you've moved it even farther. And I think it's good. It's really what we're trying to do, or what I think we did as a profession, doing it in probably not only more creative ways now, but probably more effective ones as well. At least cost effective, as you say. You cut out big sets and the Federal Reporter, and you can probably rely on online access to a lot of periodicals that we used to struggle to maintain subscriptions to, and fill in gaps and whether we're missing and that kind of thing.
That's right.
It's a different world. Well, Barbara, it's been wonderful talking to you this morning and visiting here at the University of Maryland Law Library in Baltimore. You mentioned earlier one thing, and I want to just sort of clarify that perhaps for our readers who are not familiar with the University of Maryland system. I noticed driving down the street, not only the law school is here in downtown Baltimore, but you have the School of Medicine, the School of Dentistry, and perhaps some other units. But your main campus, as you mentioned, was in a place called College Park. And for those who are maybe not up on their geography of the greater metropolitan Baltimore, Washington area, College Park is really down about 30 miles south in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And that's where the major university is, actually. The administrative offices, I assume, are down there. Most of the undergraduates, or at least some of them.
That's correct. So this is just a professional campus.
Mm-hmm.
There are 7 professional schools: social work, medicine, pharmacy. Law is a little bit of an outlier on this health sciences campus, and so that's been a little bit of an issue all the years, but you deal with that. So from a library standpoint, that's actually why it was so important for us to be part of the library system here, because we have always had to deal with the fact that we don't have a university library across the quad, and how to have delivery services, delivery vans, delivery trucks. I mean, we have done it all over the years, and I think have managed to make it transparent for the faculty and students, but it has not been easy, as you can imagine.
Well, as you say, our role is to provide access to legal information and actually information in general if the need is for other things from other disciplines. Yeah. Well, sort of on that, as we sort of get towards the end of our conversation this morning, is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to bring up? I always like to give people with whom I'm speaking on camera that opportunity.
Not really. I would just say no regrets whatsoever. I think it's been a wonderful career. I've met so many wonderful people, and as I said, I've worked with so many people here that have been fabulous. So I would certainly recommend this as a career to anyone. I don't think it's time to say the libraries are obsolete. I really think the opposite.
Mm.
And I think it's a great career. I think it is well worth investigating it for students who are starting out.
Good. Well, I want to thank you not only on my behalf, Barbara Gontrum, but on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodak, and of course Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I've had the opportunity to work on developing the history of law librarianship for Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf portion of Hein Online. Thank you.
Thank you.